audience was informed how to instrument and that everyone would not be communication. Sonya Verma from invited conversations, one seemingly appealing, doing as important for some orientation. These work be advanced. Now, life so, They want to break the spell with
Excuse my voice.
Right. So I wanted to offer at the beginning some orientation to a few things. The first is realize that some of you in here through you came here through communication from others. So I just wanted to share with you a bit more about this. If you're in that first category, and Stacy and Sarah will help with them. In just a minute, for those of you who have been with us, always lovely to be in a community like this. The Institute for Research and Sensing is an interdisciplinary research institute at the University of Cincinnati, focused on sensing, perception, and sensory technology development. These are strengths of the University of Cincinnati, but they've been typically conversations held in the sciences and engineering, mathematics, etc. So one of the unique things about Lewis is its commitment to bringing in more diverse voices in that, especially in the humanities, social sciences, and fine and performing. We do a variety of things. We run a graduate program where teams of graduate students seek to innovate in sensing perception or sensing technology development over the course of the year. We run annual working groups. The last working group was on training environments and learn human health and wellness. And we also do public programming like these and valorant events. We're supported by the University of Cincinnati. We also work with external partners, including the Environmental Protection Agency, National Institutes for Occupational Safety and Health, and Procter and Gamble. Those are this year. So some of the funding that we're able to use to do these kinds of events come from these entities as well. Um, and the later events are meant to be curious conversations from really diverse voices. I would guess that many of the folks invited here in the center had never been. So they're really encountering each other for the first time. We do these thematically and type of events. We've done a few in Washington. We did one at the Swing House, and we did one at the Lincoln Project, a main pool, upper room. We've done them in front of the lobby. So, and we do have more. We have one still in 25th. It will be immigration and census of belonging, and more band, including one in Northside as part of the North by Northside Music Festival in May. It will be some recording of the songs. So they're ambitiously, ambitiously adventurous and intended to be. Um, the way that this works, and the reason why we seated you in concentric circles as an audience is because this is not a panel discussion. These are not analysts. We are having a conversation together. And when these conversations work well, the audience is speaking up. So you may or may not be prepared to speak up, but we will get you get moved to a question or a comment to begin the conversation with the folks that we've invited that are crystal for the conversation. They're really will call on people if they raise hands. We are live streaming this through Twitter, YouTube, folks that are in our online audience and also give questions or comments that will come in through manning the EMDR equipment. Um, it's really meant to be a conversation. These conversations are long, and eventually we're going to take the conversation away from this moment here into our lives. We have never arrived at conclusions in these conversations, and this is our third point. We're not being do so. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our panelists, starting with Manuel. You can pull out my notes because I'm actually sitting like in a circle of people who's get my details. But Manuel is actually the poet laureate of the city of Cincinnati. And much of his work deals with human movement, belonging, life, and um, that I've read, listened to for Manuel oftentimes. He's experience. Yeah. So, that's one of the reasons why he's here with us today. Um, uh, Next to Manuel is Andie Bernard. Welcome, Andy. And he is an EMDR therapist, wellness, and he focuses on the interconnectedness of the mind, the body, and focus. That's one of the core areas. Yeah, right. Okay. Next to India is Julia Bianco. Julia is a Buddhist and storyteller, poet, um, and a lot of her work is thinking about how collective memory and the experience of migration and modern Western culture connect with place and yeah, we're going to take a quick pause right here because it's Julia's birthday. People up for singing after the game. All right. Happy birthday. Good day, Julia. Okay. We've all, in some ways, met Sonya Verma, who was uh, leaving us with Sarah just ago. And so Sonya is fine in radiant life, and she is dedicated to inspiring, educating, and empowering individuals and communities to live healthier and more fulfilling lives. Which I feel like you're doing good work, just having experienced your sound. So thank you. Too. So yes. So Sierra comes to us from the University of Cincinnati, and she's an assistant professor in the Department of Rehabilitation, Exercise, and Nutrition Science. She did training and spiritual psychology, but also physical therapy. And you know, those two fields to try to understand how producing factors like environmental and social factors impact community individuals with neuromotor disabilities. Right, so welcome, Sarah. Your last but not least is Stacy Sims, non-biological director of the Well, playwright, author, many things, many in life, right? And really dedicated to wellness and mindfulness in the adults as well as youth. Yes. So mindful music, which is in schools across the nation. Helping children to begin their days or pause in their days to ground themselves in their bodies. Yes. So, how can we help you more about the love? Thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. We work at the intersection of arts and wellness. And as Nate said, we have national programs. Our biggest reaching one is mindful music. Audio, video class every day, opted out in the announcements for schools, so that there's a experience of learning to center and imagine and notice mindful poetry moments. We kick off next we have adult new offerings, really beautiful that you can visit and write and publish. Well, uh, lots of folks in the room, and then we have a try, you can like each of the programs that really center the body and about sense and somatic sense of ourselves as a tool to really understand how to show up in a complicated world um, with presence. So, and we also, one last thing about this space, Patrick over there runs all of our events. So we love to host events, we love to co-host events, but we also we're a resource for the community. So if you're like, this is a pretty cool, why don't we do something
Yes, you can. So Patrick is the person to talk to about. So thanks everyone. It really is our artist and residents. Yes, we're back about that. Okay.
Thanks, Patrick, for thinking about me seeing me. Wow. Online suggests our topic tonight is somatics, sensing, healing, and hope. And we have folks here that interact with the body in therapeutic lenses and medical settings, as well as through some public. And so, the way that this will work, there was a question that I think we've invited to answer, maybe more. And past that point, the conversation's gonna run. Please just feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, offer thoughts, etc. So the question we'll begin with, and we can do this popcorn style, as it were, where folks use the sound and the smoke moves them to share in response to this. So that's the need for everything. So the question we're going to on, which is really to help us understand how somatic sensing or experiencing shows up in your work in the world. So give us a little bit of the insight how somatic sensing or experiencing shows up in your work.
Okay. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking the massive story and looking at it. Um, in my late 30s, early 40s, I came to understand that I had been sort of on the run from my somatic distress and mental distress using alcohol, anxiety medication, and all kinds of tools to regulate myself. Guess what? It doesn't work over time. So I got sober, started doing Pilates, and about the same week, um, I had a lovely life prior, but all of the writing, publishing, basically being present to myself and the rest of the world came after that. So then I was teaching Pilates, I was starting to do circle work, starting to do, kind of the beginning of mindfulness, and really understood that one's interiority is really sort of uh, is whatever one is either connected around or expanded around with what's into life is gonna be a direct mirror to the capacity for the extra life. So it wasn't until maybe 10 years into all that that I actually was given the book by Thomas Canis Somatics. In the first physical pages, I was just like, highlight. It was a word and a concept that basically I already understood, but I didn't know what the name of it was. And so for me, some of his definitions, we have different ideas of it, which is cool. Understanding that it's your first person experience of self, your own interpretation, and that there's a great opportunity to lean in what that means for individuals as you do, and create a shared vocabulary over essentially the experience, the lived experience of concepts. We embed that and care about that in all ways here at the well. So that's my schematics. I'll go. Maybe there's a couple things I need to reflect to the audience and Stacy to hear. Stacy is being in the Senate for 30 years. You're 30, I'm 20. Just trying to find my own self. And so like you're, Hamilton. And then you started talking to some guys, and then you started to find this, and I'm in the schools helping kids who can't regulate that school big drum in the eyes. That's where I'm sounds crazy in that moment when that music comes on. And like systematically and just like maybe also. So check this music for a long time. You're so welcome. Thank you for it all. Um, the reason I wanted to go on the show Stacy, is because, first of all, from a somatic standpoint, it's very at the age of 6. I kind of do I know it's like I knew it's for and it set me on a journey that I think a journey for most of your childhood and much of the teenage years. And I had an incredible trauma, but we had a lot of chaos and a lot of strife and change. And I absolutely know the trajectory of who I am possible for me was because that body, that movement, it just was releasing it all. I didn't know. It felt like joy. It felt like me. It felt like passion. It felt like that. In the end, it's like I could connect with myself better. I did things. And so that's the journey there. And through a road, I am I am a mind body healer. In fact, I call my and Stacey does make a space here at the lawn we use, but we go in through the emotional. So we're tracking increment emotions moment to moment to moment. And we're finding out the story and how the women in the news we all know. It's finding in that other moment and making a connection. And all of us that to run with you, that one's safe with you. That we just make space for it in that moment. And through connecting the story, tracking the emotions and asking for permission, we make space for this somatically and just expand it until it creates this window of life of an moment container. And when things happen, over beyond that, it just creates that hypervigilance in the transform in the body. So we're just walking having fun and doing the things and knowing that Stacey said and just being able to drop in with the emotion of the story, finding the body expanded. That is the most profound feeling. So it shows up every day. Can't be without the body. Just and so yeah, like that. Yeah. So, with that, I'm like taking it to my yes. Everyone hero thing. I do want to I think the question was how the somatic experience shows up in your work. And I want to add to expand on what some people are saying from the perspective of an artist and an immigrant that already there's like a really interesting relationship with geography and the body and um, but I would say that um, the way that shows up in my work after a very long process of also really struggling um, for decision making, all those things, um, finding the space for awareness through my practice. I realized that there's a collaboration that can happen between the mind, which is like I feel like we live well, you, we live and process through the mind, but we forget so much about we're basically um, you know, like the body in space, experiencing through the body. And I understood that the direct experience of my own body in space can become a portal um, and a strategy to gain knowledge and understanding that it's not necessarily uh, or otherwise I wouldn't have access to through my mind. And thinking about um, I think about migration the way that I think about uh, ecotons, which in biology, and maybe you guys know more than I, but in biology, an ecotone is the space in between two different ecosystems meet, and uh, it is known that within that ecotone you can find biodiversity that either of those two ecosystems So I feel like the meaning of the body space uh, creates spaces for expansion rather than restriction. And I feel like the somatic experience in my work shows up like that, like that direct experience and what can be understood through the body, through the senses, with knowledge and understanding of myself and the world can come out. I'm going to build off of the point you were making, Julia, about how the experience of the world is in many ways shaped by your mind and your modeling performance. Because we have people with disability, and so for people with disability, the relationship that they have with the world is different because they would that isn't built for them, right? They have to often use their modeling capabilities in different ways to create an equal condition for themselves given their particular skill sets. So one of the criticisms of the profession of physical therapy, for instance, is that it's very grounded in the body and trying to fix bodily characteristics and correct the body, thinking that that's going to improve innovation and experience with the world. Um, but what people with disabilities have in large part been telling us is that that can in some ways reach them and be oppressive because they don't get to experience like we do for those most with disability. And so I think part of what I try to do in my work is to expand that understanding of movement that we don't have to move in one. There's no one correct way. Um, because in order to have these movements in the world, we want to experience the body and we want to have a relationship with the world, but it doesn't have like a correct movement pattern.
That's interesting because I think about that. A lot of I think my journey might have started like, well, everyone's where there's some type of illness or there's some dysregulation of the nervous system. And I've carried it on that that's got me interested in somatics and something. So this idea of like judgment of correct movement, correct showing up kind of almost restricts all of us. I feel that it just puts us in a space of this is how between my teach yoga and people get very focused on alignment. Like it needs to be perfect versus can I drop my awareness into my body and sense into that space and what is showing up for me? And can I be compassionate in that experience? Because then it starts to get back to that internal experience of compassion.
The experience. We have the an experience of recognizing the poetry. What? That's a physical experience. It was not a training. It was the I was looking to think of poetry as an intellectual event,
Mm,
almost as if the poet has to be beyond
mm,
either in the intellectual or spiritual way, but always leaving the mind. And the subject of the poem was not the mind, and the intention of the poem was not to reach out spirit. And then later on in life, several experiences like this was becoming and made me understand the body as a knowing entity and as a teaching entity. Listen, and so in my own poetry is being that I am trying to release to heal poetry for like years. I need the musical. And when I write, I do not write because I have an idea. I'm writing as sound. And when chasing the sound and some idea comes, but my writing is not uh, following a concept. It's following rhythm. It's following a melody. And then I stumble upon it's something that I know that I needed to say, but I do not write because I have something to say or anything to say.
Mm.
It's like, and then I find out that I have eyes and my and I realized looking at my normal, I still do read poems when she was awesome. The way thinking, the way she react, I guess I'm very sure I was waiting. I was really on. And it was not anything right on the beginning. The way we was still really the vibrations, the sound, was, the environment is an amazing worry than the memory. Even if she doesn't know me personally, the sound of my voice or really, even if you don't, or even if you can recall something with and this was very humbling because I come from the academic training of literary theory and all of it. We're not going to attend the money.
Mm.
They qualify that as an only intellectual endeavor, you know, uh, and the experience of and it the entrepreneurs listening to her because we both talk about humanity, but she has to word thoughts which goes into you. Um, it was very humbling for me. So I think that the body helps you in many ways. I'm just pulling a thread from many of these stories, which is kind of a thread of reconciliation. But I heard dysregulation, and maybe it's opposite, which is regulation. But then I also heard stories of like the original consilience, the childhood consilience in your story, and many of the stories, people finding themselves unreconciled, find pathways back to reconciling themselves. There's a deeply personal aspect to all of this, which I think comes from us all living in a body. Um, and yeah, yeah.
I've heard it referred to as just the capacity to it's two things. One, I think that it's regulation on the opposite side of dysregulation. But when it's properly done and you're patient over time, it really is transformation. It's widen and it's that capacity to both discern and then link. And I think in our current world, it's very easy to be discern, discern. Discerning you're triggering me, the discernment, but the slow, patient process allows there to be the discernment and the linkage, and then the evolution of the discernment. So it doesn't become fixed. And then I feel like then that we start to get into this sort of stream of some sense of slowing down. We can discern even time scale. The crazy one we get on, the one that we're being fed through fragmenting media and speed. So I will say one other thing that Manuel and I were at a gathering together recently and on the West Coast, and I can't help but bring it up a lot. The what the, all of us on our phones that's doing to us that on the screen, the guy who invented it now works for the Center for Humane Technology. And his quote was that it wastes the equivalent of 100,000 human lifetimes a day. When we're doing that, we're being sent right to the base of the day by design, because that's our base, the place from which we'll buy stuff. We're stale there long enough for someone to make money. It's a lot of dysregulation we have to regulate. I would love to speak, Jackie, to the beautifulness of the story um, with your daughter and picking up on that. Yeah, you're communicating to her through co-regulation, through somatic voice and your thing. And when that happens, that's what we're like, I'm safe and the world's safe. I can trust you that good things will come. And then I can lean into good things. And so what pulls us away is when the opposite of that happens. And we leave that story. And then that story takes us in another direction, which then brings us back to if we should we find ourselves there to that reconciliation we're talking about. And then the transformation, right? Because it's like the sun coming, it's like we come into the world and the world doesn't stay on. And we have to like come back in. And from my experience, really how that can be done for me is that what do I feel as it relates to my story and how am I seeing talents for that right here in my gut, right on my space. And you know, I just I can future cast here. On that it's gonna show up for freedom and liberation. Many cells in her body. It's really beautiful. And I'll like to say, as I meet with people in their journey for healing, what ultimately ends up happening is I'm always one step behind and artistically, but we're both really we are creating a container by which I can hold this automatically in me and just hold it there with artistically and co-regulate with them and teach them, reteach them the experience in the moment. So when we're talking about it, we're just being in. Sometimes I have to be that artistic form that ever created for his daughter that won't ever, it won't have to be built by anyone else. And in the very end of the process, should there be an end towards that, it's Dorothy, right? It's the hero's journey. It was in them all along. They have these internalized voices that now that are these figures like he's done for his daughter that then they pull in and attack based on what the that's exactly what they did. They find a voice for that and they expand that body. And then they want that life where it never gets. Sorry. Yeah, that's the scenario, but it's always started with the voice. It's always going to be there.
I am still reading that book called The Deep Well, where there's this like research that connects early childhood adversity with actual medical diagnosis. Um, how if you measure, or if you measure um, the amount of uh, specific experiences that are considered childhood adversity, and then look at folks' medical history. There's a really clear correlation on how the, have like a very tangible impact on the body. So this brings me to just like reaffirming what you're saying, how much of our somatic experience, one, is rooted in childhood, and two, is fictional. And it can totally be metabolized and optimized and transformed in a way that does, um, but this also brings me a lot of hope. And I totally resonate with that, and I feel like there's for those more sciencey people, there's science behind it. Uh, how much, yes, make a point of how much the experience of being together can have like a very tangible impact in our mental health, and also in our impact in our actual physical health. If we are in a space that is co-created space.
Right. Makes me think of so many different things. One is ancestrally too, like how so much we're carrying that we don't even know that we're carrying emotionally, physically, from generations before. So I believe they were saying epigenetics, 7 generations on this side can carry traumas and stories that we have no idea that are there. And so that, and then how that story plays out in our lives, we don't even know. And I think about it with sound quite a bit. Um, it doesn't require so much that, there is some mental processing around it, but frequency and sound can bring people into spaces where there's a journey, where there is almost a journey aspect of sound where it sounds they feel it in their bodies, and it allows them to kind of travel in it without having to put this outside story onto it of, okay, and then they do it sometimes and they become curious, but it allows them to kind of transform or optimize that experience into shifting it or almost becoming it within their bodies because it's always, especially with these instruments, they're unusual. I mean, no sound. Well, we're in space, like in the room itself, there's sound around us. And so we're always taking it in. If we don't deeply listen and we don't listen. And so when we're in spaces where we actually have kind of curious about it, it allows ourselves to kind of already slow down to allow that process to kind of come through. Because I mean, even to rock, like we're here, we're sitting in this room with somebody in a completely different culture who does not speak English, have a very different experience somatically. And so it's kind of crossing that barrier for a lot of people. And then I think about your daughter and I think, oh my gosh, she doesn't understand, but she gets it. It's a sense. And I think that when aging parents, one hope can be there, that's the moment's not, immigrant parents as well, and, like, with that, really educated, but if I'm feeling off, it immediately triggers a very different response from them, and so I'm very conscious when I walk into spaces around them, so, like, the moment before I step into the room, like, I come into the space of compassion for myself, and it's a whole different experience. And it doesn't require me other than just to kind of listen and not, you know,
Thank you for what you just shared, and also to remind folks that all I need is said. And,
yeah,
like, what is there
Part of like somatics. I'm taking training or dating these things. I'm like, I'm gonna if I feel better and more people when I really listen to something where I'm not like a class and like I can feel like the conversations like such an information
I I think there is a do that because I've seen it in many workplaces. And like the values of people relaxing sometimes. And some administrators with what's impossible means or things are like in schools. People have risk, you're literally risking your life. And then it's not for favor to but what are you doing for you? Like think of it going up like we don't remember and we're going to ask you to take a copy in one class or the other. You know, or we're gonna install a coffee machine. We're more energized to do this, which is really stupid. Um, But the thing is, community. This is also one flaw American community on this. We want to solve our,
Mhm.
we don't want to solve deep. You know, like it's not already. I this problem is not going to. I am going to like so this is not my problem. Even though they continue. But I feel the world of conscious. And everything compassion always was make us to fundamental societies because there is no in the current overall feeling of recognition. There are problems. Um, yes, if this conversation only stays the dating paper, it will be isolating because you know, loneliness is a health that we all need to address.
Well, somebody, I don't know where I heard this, but I was, it really struck me. It's like, when does self-care become self-harm? When we're obsessed with better, getting better, getting better, getting better, am I not going to put it into a relationship space or a circle space or something, uh, sort of something is centered that we're all working around and working with in a collaborative way. That's what joy is. But most of our structures are not set up for it. I'll say one other thing I took away from this conference we went to, this gathering, is that there was a whole section on biomimicry. And they were talking about how, you know, forestry got messed up. And so this idea of like planting a field of trees like rows, which doesn't do anything for the soil and doesn't do anything for health of whatever's growing over time. But that if you plant it properly in the field, you only have to plant 16% of the field. That quote that really struck me is that healing circles grow toward each other. So that the circle of this crop, this crop, this crop, these trees will fill the entire field and then replenish accurately, which I believe is a permaculture idea, right? Yeah. Yeah. But that's what I feel like is something that's really important to me at these difficult times, is I can imagine trying to manage 16% of something versus 100. And then if we have these healing spaces, then we can fix it.
So we hope that this space exists, and thank you for everyone who stays room. There's something about it here about this here. When we talk about certain certain things. I'm curious, something that you've been from the for me, this is very visual. And I would have my family and stuff. I can't do this to do it. I would do that too. This doesn't exist. So then, like, please, but it's like it's easy to absolutely touch those things. So you can bring that into your life and your family and into anything that's changed my world to and for your actions. I think like my mom, she's she was really really to her and there's something to feel like something that something makes me cemetery, the worship, story. I wanted to. I wanted them to do all the things, and I realized it was coming from a space of I know this, you don't, which then puts them on a, even though it's coming from a space of love, it makes them feel very good. And you want them just to feel safe and loved, and you want them to feel relaxed, but they may not join you in the same way.
it's harder with us. Personally, I feel like it's harder with kids. Like when it's the younger child coming to them, they're gonna find it more likely from their peers. But when you start to show them that you're actually doing better and that they start to want it. And it's kind of coming from this, it is compassion. It's coming from a space towards yourself and then towards them, and it starts to allow them to be the way they are. They start to naturally shift like that healing circle. It's not going to look in the same way in your experience, but at least in the way that I'm experiencing it lately, we're all doing our own thing. But when one or two people start to show up in a more kinder, compassionate, listening place, the circle starts to shift. The dynamics of the relationship, when the internal is kind of in a set space, what shows up around you, that starts to happen. At least that's what I do. And it's not perfect.
Like the mental health aspects, kind of going off what you were saying about acceptance and accepting them for who they are. I was having a conversation today with someone about how can we promote acceptance of disability who have had struggles. And one of the kind of commonalities that we had in the conversation was as physical therapists, we need to show sediments for disability. And that kind of something that can promote some acceptance as well. So I think it goes kind of bi-directional. If you show some acceptance, then there can be some acceptance as well. Again, the mental health aspect is not my expertise, but just some application and skills.
Yeah, that's okay. Just being one word. I would say that I'm gonna acknowledge that I've had that thought for a very long time, and that um I also want to acknowledge that parents particularly hard not to struggle. I think I'm very important sometimes more. I um yeah, because it's kind of like they kind of did them harm. So they the relationship is always kind of messy. Parents, they kind of reflect back stuff that happened. I don't know, 20 years ago. But I'll say from my personal experience after many years of being in like very focused on yeah, I think really healing, you know, just like, understanding myself um from a very wholesome, compassionate space. I noticed what this might be will say that when I changed and I embraced radical acceptance of myself, of everything that happened. Uh, and we're talking like many years. It doesn't happen over time. I don't care anymore if my mom doesn't come to us. You know, I go with her and I meet her where she's at. I maybe we'll have something to say, but the relationship already changed because I changed. So we can have a good time, and she doesn't have to. "Oh, I didn't know doing all these things." I guess. Like no, it becomes like something that you can build a relationship with a family that may be very different from you and may not have the same interests that as you. That is still healthy, that it's joyful, and that everyone, can feel good about. Yeah, takes a while.
Just may I just very well, sorry, my parents, but like
Please.
so what I look for in a new setting is this beautiful, what I call sacred dark yoni voice that in there's like a viewer and you want to feel this knowledge with them, and that you want to feel this level of safety with them. And I absolutely the acceptance that that's where they are, that's a different part of your emotional energy. This part of your emotional energy, this part of yourself that's emotionally come to want to go in for security and say, be with me where I am, just be with me right here. That is yours to keep it, to get it, to bond and to heal within. And then as that security and self and as that's felt in other ways,
then that's the floor to go in for what it is that they are and acceptance in that. I just want to reflect to you, like I see wanting and desiring to hold them in. That's important. That's so important too. I just want to say that to you. That is so important and hard here too. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah.
And also, living with a disability can be really isolated and having a toxic individual that like most definitely 100% today. But I feel like it's hard to collectively and understand that individualized experience. You have to off of that, something about that.
I had the opportunity this time to work with 12 female identifying gender expansive youth, age 14 to 21-ish. And they were all hired to do this 8 weeks. So, and out of that group, I want to say 4 or 5 of them, um, here's was is in a now wheelchair. Finley has a cane, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, very neurogenic, but tremendous body as a constant. And it was so intriguing and disheartening to me because I really feel as though there's this emergent youth culture, human culture, where it's like the idea of the canaries in the coal mine, or just that the somatic, the deep pain, the complex syndrome, really the toxicity of this worry. And some of the young people were saying that they're so brilliant at world building, creating sonas and characters, but their ability to just live and feel within themselves is at a crisis. And one of the young people said they just feel like they should be a character, not a so literally living in a body is so hard for so many folks. I'll just say from my experience trying to create help people have a capacity to start to have sense, use sensing and or imagination and or art or other tactics. So somatics is not only body movement. And so I feel like, you know, Andy and I have talked, well, like how do we have more places, spaces where people can come and try out different forms of somatic techniques that are when you can't just be in a therapist office and you want a community. And so they're coming, but we just gotta move on. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
I think one thing to recognize is that I think there's sometimes this misconception that people with disability, because they move differently, they're not in tune with their bodies. I would argue that people with disability are in tune with their bodies. And I think one aspect that when I have been merging different disciplines into my practice with physical therapy, something that I try to, and I'm not perfect at it by any try to embrace is that I don't know what feels good to the person with disability. I don't know your body as well as you do. And I think sometimes approaching it from that type of perspective, you know your body best and you know the way that you can move and can move. I think those are things that we need to, as a society, kind of change the conceptions about the movement of disability, and that people with disability do know how to move and they know what feels comfortable to them, and they are, even if it's not movement, perhaps very, very in tune to the body. And I think that's something that a collective shift is needed.
Yeah, definitely more. There's a lot of listening that we need to do. There's a lot of learning that we have to do. I think there's willingness, but there's a lot of ignorance from people watching. Um, and because we don't have that experience, I feel like, and again, building a community, building a space that feels safe takes work, expression, and if you're not, so I wouldn't expect for anyone and and tell me directly what they need. I mean, even if they haven't all figured out. But I think there's the potential for a process of feeling start feeling safe so that we have space um, for folks to come and us to listen, to understand what is needed, and then go from there.
And I think some of it comes down to recognizing some of the historical underpinnings of the practices, right? So understanding that it's long been approached from a paternalistic standpoint of this outsider dominant approach that I know best, but we don't have that experience per se. And so I think start having that as a starting point of recognizing some of the flaws and some of the philosophical underpinnings of why we do what we do is important to kind of create that shift.
I am not an expert opinion by any means. While I was working with people, I was working now to be the guy to refer some leaders, organize resources, and they got along series of leaders, which I didn't know exists. They never heard about medical techniques. And the idea of looking at the medical techniques uh, made me and made many people aware of many of the medical practices. On, from a point of view that does not mean decrease the payments. Almost everything is with so this recognition of giving has been transformed. Like the Western medicine has ignored all of the uh, indigenous knowledge that is much more not close to the not closer to the breathing, understanding, and it has been frequency. Almost as if the baby is a disease, it has to be taken out of this woman at this but at some point, and then the schedule of the doctor is we are going to schedule it's just a week. Go with the need of the need of mom or the baby. So, um, one way that I think like big reading will cater to this will make certain ways. I believe that the women doing this kind of things and we always have things, which is we and I can think you will be able, but we really need people like you to be the doctor and the pediatrician and the teacher and all of those. Uh, so I think that I people that are not management, we need to be able to
Mhm.
listen,
Yeah.
learn.
So I'd like to offer just a very brief, just to have some experiments during 2020 console. Give us that and spend the even have some which experience the city and like that. And usually from somebody has the neurodevelopmental illness. He the day of the accident was able, you know, in his able-bodied and ready to be mild. So it was great. He's 50 years old. There's a big what he found, he was in rehab for 4 months, and there was only one person who could come, and that was me, to be there because it was during COVID. And what he found was he was able to mobilize, walk paralyzed completely on the left side, and what those months that he was there, he had much an innovation of others creating the example that's what he needed. But then he realized I'm in a place. There is no humanity here. Has anyone that made this bed ever made it? Has anyone who needed this bed for food ever? Because it doesn't fit under the bed. The way that online, the way that you the TV, I can't put my head to the no. There was nothing that his body could use that was around him. It was as if their somatics wasn't considered. The humanity of it was like, well, it was so strikingly obvious. He attempted as he got better 3 months to use his voice to say, because he was in a privileged position, as a cis white man who never heard the thing. And so he's fine. I'm going to do the thing. He had no voice because now they didn't care. It was just complete. It wasn't there. And trying, he would tell people, we should talk. And I'd lay in this bed and he would tell you, but he couldn't get traction. Right? But the humanity of the people making it, people need that are going to be there. You're the only be there to say, yeah, this feels good for me. This works. Or it doesn't work. This just wasn't the case. Yeah. Yeah. I'm used to it. Yeah. And like, it's fine. And now there's a thing. See, no one is it's not the end. Add on to that if you could. And The I have the privilege of getting to work in Cambodia a lot, and working with people who've had meeting young people who have gone through and we're in like an aftercare situation. And among the things that they are experiencing is a lot of spine pain at a very young age, which just comes with trauma. But a couple of the things that we were able to do is that like, in their school, it was very it's very like rigid old school. So they were all sitting this way and the teacher was this way. So they already they have these ranking spines and neck. So I was able to ask them to be able to change the way the classroom was set up. So then they're just organized. And the other thing was they had a lot of sleep terror, which makes sense too. We got them body pillows for when they came in. So if you're a side thing, you put the pillow between their knees, and this way it helps open up the spine in the back and created like occupational therapy ease because the body will self heal often if you can give it enough bolsters. And so I think that's another lens to comfort in the body is figuring out how, well, and it's like the hospital room. Like, what are the occupational kinds of therapy ways that you can create more comfort so that the body naturally needs?
I was gonna put it, um, when you have comments shown and you don't really know every single source and you just know what's going on for this how do you regulate your nervous system? Like you pause and also it's not great to know. I mean, I don't have to this. But doctors just throw more than they're lost to disconnect. Yeah, I'm on study and I have PhD and I have been scanned, but I keep being home. You need this, you need that. PHP, you need ECT, you need Jesus. But I don't feel like that's all intensive. But when you're in a certain bracket, you can't get more. And I see a better picture and I see I don't know what exactly how do you start to self-regulate? You know, I was very prepared tonight because I am very dysregulated. But I'm also coming from this honesty where I'm trying to find a way. Because I did one through this and they all basically said, we don't know you. You get well there. Stay on medicated and not get help. And that's just not okay.
I feel I Shauna's become a friend, and I really appreciate how she's so hungry. There's so many people who have that knowing, and the system is so complicated.
And there is, and he basically said, you can tell me I said, I asked Sarah John, I remember. I said, what do you believe in now?
Did you want to chime in?
It's been from, I heard that's the last thing. And she's an interesting thing you learn. With this communication. And they never system just system connected from stay right. As doing this things. I shouldn't be that's what I'm talking about like Friday.
like experience mostly out Mexico. This brother that is away. If I compare it to whatever is supposed to be the place for groups. In America, it's this white Christian freedom. You know how the and starts to that from the language sort of permanence is like I'm learning this idea. I'm just trying to regulate the things this we live really out of control when the nervous system is doing its job. When I each word is talking about much from the right reasons and how I have more agency to make them. And when I do, to be clear, I'm going to be able to then you want to say like that was a gift.
Even if it's then maybe something that I'm looking for. I have a poetry and 99% of the kids that show up for poetry don't want the name of sometimes. Sometimes they like that one traumatic experience. The one time, hopefully, the one time that they experience life super inevitably that they life. And maybe they all need that. And it's interesting because they come home or to tell the story, but they don't want to tell the story. This is very difficult. What I tell it is that before you tell the story, before you sing the story, before you tell you paint the story, whatever you do, that story owns you. But once you host, that moment does not own you anymore. I think that the arts can offer you an outlet than science cannot offer you. I'm not saying to not think that I know that cannot occur. But there is a creative part in this. We have the word alchemy has been said several times. The first thing alchemy was to transform anything into gold, and that's exactly art. It takes a soil river and transform it into find your whole way of making music out of everything that you want. You can make darkness into light. That is what art is. Find your and all of your story, all of your story, all you can use it as a fuel for really. When the reality is beautiful, we must respond with beauty because it's the least of it. When reality is awful, we must respond with beauty because that's the least of it. Just transforming everything. And
Do you want to take something? And then when I think anybody else talk, it's like long value of self, and at some point, I really was, it's funny to me. Is fine, and then person body the ideas and also and I want to perspective from and our body and similar to you, I had to say, I mean, the mind with and I know it's very special, but the word
I'm throwing ideas in, because I think it's been adding up over time, and there's so many different elements, but I think there's been, in particular religions, there's the a lot of sort of like shame from a religious point of view, and I think that, that, once marketing and all those things started to realize that they could, for first women, but now men and women sort of shame us into what size we're supposed to be and create a capitalist system around our own sense of what's accurate body, what's an accurate body makes us then live outside of our own bodies as observers of our own bodies versus inside our bodies. And then the more recent technology, just these little teeny tiny fragments that are coming at us and building, there's this like this like up here fragmented swirl of literally just, we have to disassociate when we're in little fragments. That's what they want us to do. So I feel like it's just layering, but also at the same time, the fact that we're all here, the fact that our bodies are either our addictions aren't working or our pain is too much, or here's what I know. We all know that this is not sustainable. And so we're calling for it, we're lamenting it. Uh, and I hope we're like with the planet, like these are our planets in our solar system, and we just gotta do it, right?
I want to add to that. Um, Speaking of the planet, modern Western culture started a couple hundred years ago. The separation of science, art, blah, 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 the separation of the mind and the body. Like, how can those two be even separate? Like, I think our job is to actually uh, come take all the aspects of ourselves and reintegrate them because they're not separate. Like, all this is here now. But I feel like, I'll get a little conspiracy. You got people who are really fragmented or disassociated from themselves, within themselves, from each other, and from the source of life, which is this planet. You can make a lot of money. And this is the environmental crisis. This is all that's happening on a social and human and an environmental level. So the tragedies that we unfortunately witness every day comes to me, in my opinion, from this separation. So life is relational. And I think that coming back to that over and over again is my relationship with myself, is my relationship with you and everyone, our relationship with each other, our relationship with the based on care, compassion, again, and yeah, just um like really like deep understanding that I can only get to know myself through and that idea of co-regulation, all these things. Um, Maybe that's where the solution is. I don't know. I'm hoping that we're also coming back to where this planet and we are within the planet when we are relational. Yeah.
I would love to jump in and the two energies here, and that is from my experience, the deepest sense of overwhelm is coming back to the body for the people. Like it's not always so. First of all, there's a couple things I want to say. That the moment people walk into my room, they know it is not what's wrong with you. I have it here. That's the story. That those are the things we did. It's a 100% true. Never put wrong with us. And that healing is not a place to be fixed. It's a place to be found. So those are the two tenets that foundationally just are everything that when you do, when we do the work together. In that experience of them coming back from them grabbing the storm, which by the way, a little thing just to make it bite sizes, story follows something, share language in every part. And that the stories that we hold is always following the state of our from our system. And so whether we're eating Sunday morning, big on nervous system, it doesn't really matter. Today, time also more tense. That I just miss the life, rigid, because I chronic stress and whatnot is there. This vessel time is 80% of my wisdom at all time. So if I'm standing up and it's raining and it's busy on the street and I'm walking in it and I have one good job and I don't know if it's a accomplishment. It doesn't really matter. It's like I said, the signal and my brain's job, not my mouth, my brain's job through this capitalistic culture we were just about. My brain's job is to make a story that's equally as scary as the thing on my mouth. And as soon as it's confirmed, sends it right back to the body. When you see anything that looks like this, smells like this, tastes like this, sounds like this, respond the exact same way. That story comes mistake. Again, I call that story. The only thing is that in that moment, when it comes to food, we make a meaning of the story from the things that happen to us, right? Left side yuck, right side deal is what I call my book. Left side yuck, hypervision. Whoa, close. There's a book. Well, I know some junk over here that I call that in you that I can say to you, you locked. This saber tooth is way bigger, and it looks like this. I see people all the time. They drive here. You say, "What are you doing? Is it out here?" And I got it, and I'm like, yes, you are. What can I not see what else? What can I not see? There and something. I know we cannot see what's outside. I mean, this. Well, I mean, I say that you are doing this, making sense of upside down, figuring out what this healing actually for you. All of a sudden, it comes back. And I say, if you're here, you know what then like when we work to get here, just for instance, speaking emotion, just being with a company, otherwise voices like lower to the unicorn, so we here. Once you're here long enough, then it's like, yeah, comes to truth. So it's embracing some situations, every human emotional bond, every sensory that you have in you, have to develop that relation with women. And that's the emotion of the story. So if it's prenatal, and I come and tell you, we can be all the big ones, like well, we still involved in transaction. You're only one of it, having you, so we're probably doing women's action. Yes, that first one was survived. Once everything you survive, you can go to the body, actually in the ground, not a day or two. And next time I'm feeling that's the responsibility. We have to make all this sense with the because when children be responsible for every single thing inside of us because we're dependent. If I could see that my parents could never pay me, I'm gonna die in anxiety. So through evolution, I had to make this determination that as soon as I can see it, I'd be like, "Here, hey, wait, people they lean in out there, we do this, we do the thing." Then the last time and someone was telling me, bringing my phone, sensing what she done, how to do that. And some people were here, like, come with me. And that'll be 7 months of treatment. And you're gonna give me forward and I'll just come in and instead of just saying, around. Because it's there and then you show him on the run.
Yeah.
And when we get there in our bodies, then it's stuff. We really have to do it in so that we can expand it forward. So we can't just go as is. We always need to- It's nutrition. We just expand it.
But people have the sense that the conversation's not over yet. But that feeling's not gonna go away. And here's a good place to stop. You want to offer a couple people haven't had a chance to share anything, so maybe just a few words from Manuel, Sonya, and Sarah to close this in, because we are past the 9 o'clock hour. No need to if you don't think anyone should just do.
Like, tying all of it all together, it comes back to kind of the why. I mean, after you're in this process of healing and you're in this space of the titration and you understand that there, it's always a journey. But then I think of it, or I think of it as spirituality. Of like, why are we have a body and we're experiencing life? What does this all mean? And what gives me hope, or what gives me kind of that aspect is, this aspect that maybe we were all there's whatever you want to call this spirituality, whatever you want to call that connects us to this infinite source of the universe that lives and breathes within us. This connection to whatever that may be is wanting to come back home to itself. And this coming back home is experienced through the body. And it's coming into a space of whatever, I experienced life, the stories I have, the disconnection from the story, the reconnect, whatever that might be, and then it's this coming home. And it's this home that is infinitely whatever you want it to be. And it may not be perfect. It doesn't need to be. It never needed to be. What this idea of perfection is perfect for you for the experience that you have. And so that to me then comes into that space of this alchemy and turning something, whatever it was, into what it needed to be in this aspect of journey.
Just a simple thought of, we've been talking a lot about how we experience the world with, through, and because of our bodies. And so I think it's important to recognize that everybody's experience in the world is different. And while all of us have kind of been sharing what we know about the body, everyone's experience in the world through their body is real. And I think that's something important to recognize.
I wouldn't say thank you. It is very difficult to answer around us. That we have been, that we have done all of it. Given boxes, we have all of things that would take many years of fellowship and that go along the line to say to so many. So I am very glad that we have hope so that there is nothing. This space also gives me hope because uh, what we have talked about all the processes and all the communities that we have seen are real, but this is real. Mhm. This also exists. And each one of us, whatever we have, and, comment my daughter. I think a lot of things like this. I guess when they see, I want this community, I will never leave break for. So this is the right way. Thank you all for your Thank you for your participation and getting close there. What a beautiful conversation we had together and landing on hope at the end. So thank you all for coming. Feel free to linger for a moment and to carry these questions, conversations, and experiences into your life.
What are you need? This can be a space for be necessary. There's a lot of spaces. Yeah, fun, yeah. Okay.